the engine sounded wrong again. Maren Voss heard it in her sleep. A low, arrhythmic shudder through the deck, plating that climbed the soles of her boots and settled somewhere behind her molars. She'd been hearing it for 3 days. She hadn't said anything, because the moment she said something, she'd have to fix it. And right now she didn't have the tools, the parts, or the stomach for it. She had a job to do first. Then she'd fix the engine. The ship was called the Ardent Will, which was a lie she'd told herself when she registered it 6 years ago. It wasn't ardent. It wasn't particularly willful. It was a Kepler-class mid-hull transport, 22 years old, held together, with patch welds and stubbornness, and the occasional prayer to whatever made engines decide to keep turning. It was the kind of ship that looked, from a distance, like a fist. Up close it looked like a very tired fist. She climbed up through the dorsal hatch and stood on the hull. The star called Vendra burned low and orange on the port side, 300 million kilometers out. Below it, if you could call any direction below in deep space, hung the gas giant the charts called Perdition's Eye. It was a beautiful name for something that ugly, all bruised purple and sick yellow, storm bands wide as continents churning in silence. Maren looked at it the way she looked at most beautiful things, briefly and with professional suspicion. "Cap," Yusuf's voice crackled in her earpiece. "We're getting the squeal on comm 2 again. Patch it out. Already tried. It's coming from inside the hull somewhere. Then it's the relay junction behind the water reclaimer. I'll get it after we make the drop. You said that last week. And I'll say it next week if you keep reminding me." She climbed back down. The dorsal hatch sealed behind her with a sound like a sigh. The ship's common area was a long, low space that smelled of recycled air and old coffee, and, inexplicably, of the particular brand of hand soap that Tem used, which was floral and aggressive, and had no business being this far from anything. Tem was sitting at the table, reading something on a paper-thin screen. Tem was always reading something. Maren had stopped asking what. "She still hasn't said anything," Tem said without looking up. Maren poured herself a mug of coffee that had been on the burner long enough to qualify as a chemical threat. Give her time. It's been 4 days. She's had a hard 4 days. We've all had a hard 4 days, Cap. Some of us are communicating about it. Maren sat down across from him. The coffee was terrible. She drank it anyway. "What do you want me to do, Tem? She's cargo." Tem finally looked up. He had a face built for expressions of patient disappointment. Long, dark, with deep-set eyes that could hold a grievance the way a well holds water. "She's cargo that someone wants back badly enough to put a Keth patrol cruiser on our tail." The word Keth landed on the table like something heavy and dead. Maren set her mug down. "Say that again." "Long-range passive, picked it up about an hour ago." "I didn't want to wake you. You should have woken me. You needed the sleep." Tem. "Yes, Cap. Next time the word Keth comes up on any sensor on this ship, you wake me up if I'm sleeping, if I'm in the head, if I'm literally on fire." She stood. "Where are they?" 14 light minutes out, pacing us, not accelerating, not hailing, just watching. She was already moving toward the bridge. "How long until we reach the Sorrow Gate?" 6 hours, maybe 7 if we nurse the Feldman drive. "We won't be nursing anything." She stopped at the door. "And tell Yusuf to get his sleep when he can. It's going to be a long night." She didn't say, "A Keth patrol cruiser doesn't pace a mid-haul transport for 14 light minutes without a reason." She didn't say, "The only reason they'd want the Ardent Will was the woman locked in cargo bay too." She didn't say, "If the Keth wanted her badly enough to follow them out this far, then whatever she was, whatever she knew, was worth a great deal more than the 300 standard units Maren had already been paid." She thought all of it. She kept it to herself. A captain's job, in her estimation, was mostly to know things and not say them, until the moment when saying them was the only option left. She sat in the captain's chair, a salvaged thing with one armrest missing, and a crack down the seat that had been there so long it felt like a feature, and pulled up the Keth vessel on passive. It was a Vorak-class patrol cruiser, which meant it was fast and it was armed, and it had about 40 Keth aboard, all of them bred and trained from birth to believe that humans were, at best, a useful infestation, something that produced labor and raw materials, and occasionally needed culling when it got ideas above its station. Maren had met Keth before. She'd dealt with them in the border markets at Cassian Drift, at the fuel stations around the Weeping Meridian, once in a mining settlement on a moon called Gravel's Hope, where she'd helped broker a transit deal between a Keth factor and a human cooperative that produced ferrite ore. The Keth were not individually monsters. They were bureaucratic. They were organized. They believed in hierarchy and function and the elimination of waste. The problem was that they had decided several centuries ago that humanity was waste. Not extinct, just managed. The Keth tolerated human settlements in the outer systems as someone tolerates a slow leak. With constant, low-level resentment and a firm belief that eventually it would need to be dealt with. The patrol cruiser sat on Marin's passive display like a stone on a still pond. She reached down and hit the intercom. Cargo Bay 2. I'm coming down. The woman's name, according to the bounty paper, was Sela Orvid. She was 41 standard years old, brown-haired, medium build, and wanted for the murder of a man named Pell Dassenbrook, who had been until 8 months ago the chief extraction administrator for Keth Combine 19 on a human-settled world called Threshold. Marin had not asked about the murder. It wasn't her business. The bounty was legitimate. The client was paying well, and the destination was a border station called the Shelf, where a great many people went when they needed to disappear from one side of a law and surface on the other. What Marin had not known when she took the job was that the client was Keth. That had come clear on day 2 when the first encrypted relay had found them in the black, and the message that came through was not in any human language. Marin had not responded. She had not technically known what the message said. She had also not mentioned it to Tem, or to Yusuf, or to anyone else, because she needed to think. She unlocked the cargo bay and stepped inside. Sela Orvid was sitting on a supply crate with her knees pulled up, watching the door with the steady, level attention of someone who has spent a great deal of time waiting for bad news and has made a kind of peace with it. She was smaller in person than the bounty photo suggested, less a wanted criminal, more a woman who had been tired for a long time and was trying not to let it show. You know there's a Keth ship behind us, Sela said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Marin said, and you know why. I'm starting to work it out. Sela looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Pell Dessenbrook was processing human children. The cargo bay got very quiet. Processing, Marin said carefully. Neural extraction. There's a Keth biotech division. Very small, very classified. Not something they advertise in the border markets. They've been running trials on human neural architecture for about 15 years. Something about the way human limbic systems integrate emotional and analytical processing that the Keth have never been able to replicate artificially. She said it the way someone recites facts they have gone over until they've worn grooves in them. Children are more effective subjects because the neural architecture is still plastic, more yield, less damage to the extracted material. Marin sat down on a crate across from her. Dassenbrook ran the intake program on Threshold, Sela continued. I was his administrative secretary for 3 years before I understood what the intake program was. When I understood, I spent 8 months building a record. Everything, names, dates, transfer manifests, the whole operation. I sent it to 6 different journalists, 4 human advocacy organizations, and 1 Keth dissident cell I'd had contact with through the resistance network. She paused. Then I killed Dassenbrook. That part I don't regret. The Keth want the record, Marin said. They want me. The record is stored here. She tapped her temple, not on any device they can seize or wipe. 8 months of files, committed to memory. Names and dates, and the exact location of the primary facility on Threshold, and the 3 satellite sites on Meridian Reach. She met Marin's eyes without flinching. They'll follow me anywhere I go, and if they catch me, they'll get what they need one way or another. Marin sat with that for a moment. Outside, 400,000 kilometers of empty space. 14 light minutes back, 40 Keth and a ship that could run them down if it decided to stop being patient. Why didn't you tell me this at the intake? Marin asked. Would you have taken the job? An honest question deserved an honest answer. Probably not. Then that's why. Sela looked at her hands. I'm not sorry for that either. Marin stood up. She moved to the door, then stopped with her hand on the frame. She thought about the comm relay that needed fixing behind the water reclaimer. She thought about the engine shutter that had been going on for 3 days. She thought about Yusuf, who had a sister on Cassian Drift and a habit of humming old hymns when he was concentrating, and Tem, who read constantly and expressed care through complaint, and the ardent will, which was not ardent and not particularly willful, but was hers, and had been hers for 6 years, and had kept them all alive through worse than this. She thought about children. Can you fly, she asked. Sela blinked. Excuse me? Emergency piloting. Basic atmospheric maneuvering. Can you do it? Yes. I grew up on a station. I have a basic license. Good, Marin turned. Come with me. She laid it out for the crew in the common area. All 3 of them gathered around the table with the cold coffee and the floral hand soap smell and the low hum of the engine that wasn't quite right. She laid it out plainly, without softening it. The Keth ship, the contents of Sela's memory. What would happen to that memory if the Keth caught them? She left out the part about how she should have dug deeper before taking the job. That could be her burden to carry. Tem listened with his hands flat on the table. When she finished, he said, "Right. What's the plan?" That was Tem. That had always been Tem. Whatever the grievance, whatever the weight of the thing, there was always a moment where he simply accepted it and moved to the next step. Yusuf, who had been leaning against the wall with his arms folded, said, "I can get us another 3/10 speed on the Feldman drive if I bypass the thermal limit safeties. You'll cook the impellers. Yeah, eventually. But we've got maybe 8 hours before eventually arrives. Sorrowgate is 6 hours out." He smiled. He had a very good smile. Yusuf something warm and slightly reckless in it, like a match being struck. "Then we've got 2 hours to spare." Marin looked at Sela, who had been silent throughout. "The shelf is gone as a destination. They'll expect it. We need somewhere they won't follow. Somewhere with enough traffic that a patrol cruiser causes a diplomatic incident." "Meridian Station," Tem said immediately. "Meridian is Keth administered. Jointly. It's the joint administration hub for the Outer Meridian Accords. There are human signatories withstanding. If they fire on us inside Meridian's approach corridor, they're in violation of 4 separate treaty provisions." He paused. "I've been reading about it. I read a lot. Meridian is 8 hours out. 7 if Yusuf bypasses the thermal safeties." Yusuf pointed at Tem. "I like how he thinks." Marin looked at the table. She looked at the cold coffee. She thought about the fact that she was 43 years old, that she had been flying the outer systems since she was 19, that she had never once in that time done something that could be accurately described as heroic, and that she had a strong suspicion that was about to change. "All right," she said. "Here's what we're going to do." The Keth ship noticed their course change inside of 20 minutes. Maren was on the bridge when the passive display lit up. The patrol cruiser accelerating, cutting the distance between them, no longer patient. There was something clarifying about it. While it had been sitting there watching, it had been a threat she could manage in her head, rearranging and reconsidering. Now it was simply a fact. It was coming. They were going to run. "Yusuf. Already on it, Cap." His voice came from the engineering bay, strained with effort, and then the ardent will shuddered once. Deeply, not the familiar wrong engine shudder, but something bigger, more deliberate, a pulse through the whole frame, and their velocity climbed. The patrol cruiser climbed with them, faster, better shielded, better armed. A Vorag class at full acceleration could run down a Kepler class transport in about 4 hours, and they had 7 to cover. "Tem," Marin said. "Working on it." He was at the communications board, fingers moving. "I'm drafting an emergency broadcast on the Meridian Accords frequency. Distress plus treaty invocation. If there are any human vessels near the Sorrow Gate." "How near is near?" "Within about 2 hours response. There's a Union traffic control relay at the gate. They'll hear it. Send it." The broadcast went out, a thin signal in all that dark, the human frequency that said, "We are here. We are in trouble. We are invoking the protection of every agreement ever signed." Marin didn't know if anyone would hear it in time. She didn't know if it mattered, but she sent it because that was the kind of person she was. Someone who used every option available before accepting that the options were gone. "Cap." Yusuf's voice in her earpiece. "The impeller shielding is starting to go. How long?" 3 hours, maybe 4. We need 7. "I know what we need, Cap." She stared at the display. The patrol cruiser, gaining. The distance, shrinking. The Sorrow Gate, 6 hours and change. Then she thought of something. "Perdition's Eye," she said. Tem looked up from the comm board. "Say again?" "The gas giant. We're still in its system. Gravity well extends about 40 million kilometers. If we change course and dive toward the outer atmosphere, into the storm bands." She was already pulling up the nav charts, hands moving fast. "Keth patrol cruisers have Vorag-class sensors. Top of the line, in clear space." She looked up. "What do Vorag sensors look like inside a Class 4 gas giant's EM interference layer?" Tem was quiet for a moment, then, blind, she agreed. "We go in. We lose them in the interference. We come out the other side on a new heading. By the time they reacquire us, we've got enough of a lead to make the Sorrow Gate before they catch up." Tem looked at her with something that, on his face, was as close to admiration as he usually got. "It might work. It might also kill us," Yusuf said. "A Kepler class and a Class 4 gas giant is not." "Do you have a better idea?" A pause. "No. But for the record, I want it noted that I think this is insane." "Noted." Marin grabbed the stick. "Sela." Sela was standing in the doorway of the bridge. She'd been there, Marin realized, for most of the conversation. You said you could fly, Marin said. Emergency piloting, basic maneuvering. Yes, then I need you up here with me. If something happens to me on the transit, nothing is going to happen to you. If something happens to me, Marin said again firmly, I need someone to hold the stick. Can you do that? Sela stepped onto the bridge. She sat in the secondary seat and put her hands on the secondary controls. She looked straight ahead, through the forward screens, at the orange burn of Vendra and the bruised yellow eye of the gas giant below. I can do that, she said. Perdition's eye, up close, was enormous in the way that only gas giants get to be enormous. A scale of size that the human eye genuinely cannot process, that produces not awe but a kind of cognitive refusal. A simple "this is too large" sitting somewhere behind the frontal lobe and refusing to move. The storm bands were visible now as distinct features, each one wide enough to swallow a moon, churning in slow cold violence. Lightning crawled through the ammonia layers in pulses that lasted seconds and lit millions of cubic kilometers. The ardent will went in. The turbulence hit immediately, and it hit hard. Marin had her hands on the stick, and she had both feet on the floor, and she was still moving, the whole ship heaving, the straps across her chest snapping taut, warning lights flowering across the panel in a way that she was going to choose to find informative rather than terrifying. The comm board went to static. The long-range passive went white with noise. The sensor display showed nothing outside ship interference. Layer on layer, a whole planet's electromagnetic voice. They were blind, which meant the Keth were blind. How are we doing? She called back toward engineering. Impeller shielding is holding, Yusuf called back. I've rerouted the thermal overflow to the rest was lost in a burst of interference. She chose to interpret it as the sentence having had a good ending. The storm band they were threading was moving. She could feel it, a lateral pressure against the hull. The ship crabbing sideways despite her corrections. She put in more correction. The will bucked and shuddered and protested and kept going. This was the thing about a 22-year-old ship that had been held together with patch welds and stubbornness. It had a great deal of experience being asked to do things it wasn't designed to do. It wasn't happy about it, but it was familiar with the situation. Beside her, Sela had her hands on the secondary controls, not flying. The secondaries were passive unless Marin released primary, but ready. Ready in the way Marin recognized. Not the readiness of confidence, but the readiness of someone who has accepted that the situation is this, and this is what must be done. And so they will do it. Tell me something, Marin said. The turbulence had steadied slightly. They were between the major bands now, in a pocket of relative calm, electromagnetic hell on all sides, but the hull no longer screaming. Sela looked at her. What? The children. The ones threshold. Do you know how many? A pause. A long one. By name? Sela said. 47, from the transfer manifests. She looked forward again. Total operations over 15 years. The facility documentation suggests over 400. But I only have the names of 47. 400. Marin flew the ship. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have anything to say that would be adequate. And she'd learned long ago that inadequate words were worse than silence. She flew the ship through the electromagnetic gut of a gas giant 300 million kilometers from anything, with a Keth patrol cruiser waiting for her on the other side. And she thought about 47 names that a woman had committed to memory because she had nowhere else safe to put them. Hard to port, she said suddenly. Now. Sela moved without question, hands pulling on the secondaries as Marin released them. A split second of shared control, and the ship lurched hard left. Something massive in the storm band. A pressure ridge she'd spotted on the hull sensors, half a second before impact, scraped along their starboard side with a sound like the end of something. Then they were through it, stable, the hull integrity board showing one amber and the rest green. Good, Marin said, taking back primary. Sela released the controls. She was breathing hard, Marin noticed. Her hands were shaking just slightly. You did well, Marin said. I nearly killed us. That's what well looks like in this line of work. They came out on the far side of Perdition's Eye 48 minutes after they went in. The Keth patrol cruiser was not where Marin expected it to be. She pulled up long-range passive as soon as the interference cleared and scanned in a full sphere, looking for the Vorog-class signature, and didn't find it for 6 seconds that felt considerably longer. Then she found it. Not behind them, not on the meridian heading, but moving toward the gas giant on an intercept trajectory. They hadn't waited. They'd calculated where the will would emerge and they were moving to cut them off. Marin stared at the display. The Keth were good, they were organized, they were in many ways impressive. She had always been able to acknowledge that. What she had also always known, working the outer systems, working the margins and the border markets and the long dark stretches between stars, was this. The Keth thought in straight lines. They were hierarchical, and they were systematic, and they planned for the most probable outcomes. Because in their experience, the most probable outcomes were what happened. They were not good at the improbable. They were not built for the sudden, lateral, slightly insane decision that no rational actor would make. Marin was not always a rational actor. Yusuf, she said. What have we got? Impellers are at 60%. The bypass is starting to fail. I can give you full Feldman for maybe 90 minutes before we lose the drive. I need 45. Then you've got 45 and a bonus. Tem, the broadcast. Anyone respond? One response, Tem said. She could hear the suppressed something in his voice. Not quite excitement, closer to the very calm that precedes excitement in people who have trained themselves out of the visible kind. Union Heavy Carrier Persistent Star. She's been running cargo through the Sorrow Gate circuit. She received our treaty invocation, and she's been watching the patrol cruiser on her own sensors. A pause. She's asking if we need escort to the gate. A Union heavy carrier was a very large ship with a great many guns and a flag that the Keth, under the current treaty framework, could not legally fire on. Marin allowed herself one moment of something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to it. Tell them yes, she said. Tell them we would very much appreciate the escort. Tell them, she paused. Tell them we're carrying something important. She brought the Ardent Will around onto the new heading. The Keth patrol cruiser, on her passive display, was adjusting, recalculating, reorienting, understanding what the approaching carrier meant, understanding that the calculation had changed. Then it stopped accelerating. It held position. 14 light minutes from the Sorrow Gate, and a Union heavy carrier, and a battered Kepler-class transport, with a failing drive and a woman aboard who remembered 47 names. Marin watched it for a long time. She thought, they're deciding. She thought, they know the math has changed. She thought, they're good at math. She thought, they're going to let us go for now and report back, and the next time we'll be more careful, more planned, less improvised. They'll account for the improbable next time. Let them. Yusuf, she said. Take it easy on the impellers. We've got an escort. Thank God, he said. She could hear the relief from here. The persistent star was enormous. She came alongside the Ardent Will 4 hours from the Sorrow Gate, and matched speed and heading, and it was like being walked home by someone very large and very steady. The Keth patrol cruiser stayed where it was. It didn't follow them through the gate. In the approach corridor, waiting for transit clearance, Marin went down to Cargo Bay 2. Sella was sitting in the same place on the same crate, but something had shifted in her posture. A millimeter or two of some weight she'd been carrying, set down. She looked up when Marin came in. What happens now? Sella asked. There's a human advocacy organization with a permanent mission at Meridian Station, Marin said. One of the ones you sent the files to. The Outer Meridian Watch. They have treaty standing. They have protected premises. They also. Marin paused. They've been asking about Threshold. About Dassenbrook. They've had some partial information but not enough. Not enough to act. Sela looked at her steadily. They'll have enough now. If you want to go there. If you want to tell them. Marin met her eyes. I'm not taking you anywhere you don't want to go. Not anymore. A long silence. The Ardent Will hummed around them. Outside Sorrow Gate was opening. The transit corridor. The shimmer of folded space, the path through. Beyond it, the Outer Meridian. Meridian Station. The Outer Meridian Watch with their treaty standing and their protected premises, and their very great need for 47 names, and the specific locations of 4 sites on Threshold and the Meridian Reach. Yes, Sela said. That's where I want to go. 3 days later, in a Meridian Station Dockingham Bay that smelled of fuel and recycled air and the particular brand of hand soap that Tem had bought in quantity at the port market, Marin found Yusuf sitting on a cargo pallet doing nothing in particular, which for Yusuf was unusual enough to notice. You all right? She asked. Thinking, he said. She sat next to him. The docking bay was loud with the sounds of ships and handlers, and the distant machinery of a station going about its enormous, indifferent business. She's in there, Yusuf said, nodding toward the station interior. With the watch. I know. You think they'll do something with it? Marin thought about the Keth patrol cruiser, sitting motionless 14 light minutes from the gate. She thought about the fact that it had done math, and the math had told it to stop. She thought about how math like that worked, how it had inputs, how the inputs could change, how a name given publicly and a facility location confirmed, and 400 cases that became official record, rather than classified rumor could change the inputs. She thought about how the Keth were organized, systematic, how they thought in hierarchies, reported up chains, answered to factors and commissioners and boards that had to account for their decisions, how a diplomatic incident in a jointly administered station might be a manageable cost, how an investigation opened by treaty-standing human advocates with the full documentation of a classified biotech program might be something else entirely. Yeah, she said. I think they'll do something with it. Yusuf was quiet for a moment. He started humming something low under his breath. An old hymn she half recognized. Something his mother had probably sung. Something from somewhere further back than either of them. Cap, he said. The engine. I know. It's gotten worse. I know, Yusuf. I'm just saying, if you want to. I know. She stood up and wiped her hands on her legs and looked at the ardent will. Sitting in its berth, battered and weary and 22 years old and still upright. Still flying. I'll fix it after lunch. She walked toward the ship. Inside the station, 47 names were being recorded in an official archive for the first time. 47 names, and the location of a facility on Threshold, and 3 satellite sites on Meridian Reach, and the full documentation of 15 years of what the Keth had decided humanity was worth. Outside, the ardent will sat in the docking bay and hummed its wrong note, and waited. Marin went and fixed the engine. It took the rest of the afternoon. When she was done, it sounded right for the first time in weeks. Smooth and even, everything where it was supposed to be, all of it turning in the way it was built to turn. She sat on the deck plating in the engine compartment with her tools around her, and her hands filthy and the whole frame of the ship steady beneath her. No longer shuddering, no longer wrong, and listened to it for a long time. It sounded like something that was ready to go again. She stood up, wiped her hands, and went to find the others.